Once you're in for life. You can't turn back.
What you're about to hear is one of the few times someone from the inside decided to talk.
It was quite a life. It was everything I'd ever dreamed about having, really. It was the realization of my fantasies. I knew that what I was doing was not the right thing, but I was being well rewarded, and what I was doing was legal.
He worked for the highest levels of power. Governments listened to him. Presidents trusted him. He had the money, the influence, the life.
The system is an amazingly subtle and an incredibly effective system, essentially to serve 1% of 5% of the world's population. Terribly small. It's not even a pyramid. It's like a needle going up with a few very wealthy, very powerful people sitting on the top.
He says it's not even a pyramid. It's the point of a needle. That's how few people actually hold the power. You need to watch until the end, because what he describes in this video is the engine behind everything you see playing out on the news. It always has been. And for the people at the top, it's nothing more than a chess game.
I'd put off writing this book for a long time. I was sworn to secrecy. I'd been bribed not to write it. I'd been threatened when I tried to write it earlier, and I'd postponed it. I'd put off writing it until 9/11. And when 9/11 happened, I knew this story had to be told. It has to get out there. Most of the American people are totally unaware of what really goes on.
At the end of the day, they're still human. And there's one thing no amount of money or power can buy: a clear conscience. When you start to see the real cost of what you're doing, sleep doesn't come easy. At some point, you have to choose. But before that choice comes the oldest story in the book: greed finds a door, and it always finds someone willing to open it.
While I was still in business school in 1968, the National Security Agency recruited me. And the way that happened was that I was married to a woman whose father was very high up in the Department of the Navy, and one of his best friends was very high up in the National Security Agency. So they offered to interview me for a job, and I went in and I spent a couple of days there, especially one very intensive period when I was under lie detector interviews. And during that period of time, they discovered many weaknesses in me. I have a lot of weaknesses, and they identified me as a good candidate for an economic hitman.
Who are we to judge? None of us know what we do in his place. Ambition, money, power, these aren't weaknesses unique to him. They're human. He knows it better than anyone, and he says it best himself.
I think I'm a really good case in point of how the system can seduce you, how there's three very powerful drugs in our lives these days: sex, money, and power. And I was seduced by all three of those.
His name is John Perkins. He spent years doing the dirty work of the most powerful institutions on the planet. He wrote it all down in a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And they tried everything to stop him. Threats, bribes, silence. It didn't work. Now he explains exactly how the operation runs.
Economic hitmen work through private corporations, not directly for the government. That keeps everything much more secret, and it leaves the government out. And the government cannot be implicated as long as this is being done through private consultants. The consulting firms, of course, are paid by the U.S. government as consulting firms, and people like me, then my salary was paid by this consulting firm.
Can you imagine this actually being real? It sounds like a movie, but it's not. Now he cracks down exactly what they do and how they do it. And I'm sure you'll be able to connect the dots to a lot of what we're seeing play out in the world right now. This is the mechanism. This is how it works.
Our job was to convince other countries to take very large loans, and then to convince the World Bank and other such organizations to give these countries huge loans, let's say $1 billion, to Ecuador, to build big infrastructure projects, power plants and transmission lines and distribution systems, ports, highways, industrial parks, things that didn't benefit anybody except the very wealthy people in those countries who were quite corrupt, and we corrupted them. So our job was to convince, let's say, Ecuador to accept $1 billion loan, convince the World Bank to give Ecuador $1 billion loan. 90% of that $1 billion would come back to the United States to pay for Halliburton, Bechtel, these kinds of, or these types of companies, to build the infrastructure, and then which would only serve the wealthiest people in those countries. And then the country would be stuck with this huge debt, which over time would continue to be refinanced and get larger and larger and larger, so that in fact today, Ecuador owes more than 50% of its national budget just to pay down its debt service. which means there's very little money left to go to pay for the education or health services for the poor people, who are the ones who suffered from these projects. It was their rivers that were destroyed as we built hydroelectric plants. It was their land that was destroyed, and while a few of their people got wealthy, as a few of ours did. So now they're saddled with this incredible debt that they can't possibly pay. And so we go in and demand our pound of flesh, very much like the mafia. That's why we called ourselves Hitmen. We've done this in every country around the world that has resources that we covet. Often this is oil in places like Indonesia, Nigeria, Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, so many different places. But sometimes it's other resources. For example, in Panama, it was the Panama Canal. And in this process, we've managed to create the largest empire in the history of the world. And we've done it largely without military might. It's been done primarily through economic hitmen like me.
This is the real war. No bombs, no soldiers, just debt, corruption, and greed. $1 billion on paper and an entire country on its knees for generations. And it works because of one simple thing. If the people at the top can be bought, the whole country is for sale. Wherever there are resources, there is conflict. Always has been. Look at a map of the world's biggest crises today, and then look at where the oil is, where the minerals are, where the strategic routes run. It's not a coincidence. But what happens when a leader can't be bought? When someone actually says no?
Now, when the economic hitmen fail, as we did in Panama with Omar Torrijos, and in Ecuador many years ago with Jaime Roldos when I was there, when we fail, the Jackals are sent in. And these are CIA-sanctioned troublemakers. They will try to foment coups in a country. They'll try to overthrow the president. If they're not able to do that, then they'll assassinate him. And Jaime Roldos of Panama, who was not overthrown, so he was assassinated. And Omar Torrijos Jaime Roldos of Ecuador, Omar Torrijos of Panama, the same thing happened. We economic hitmen failed. The Jackals went in and assassinated these presidents.
Now, I'm not here to make accusations. I don't know the full investigation, and neither does anyone outside of it. But here are the facts. Omar Torrijos died on July 31st, 1981, when his plane crashed in the mountains of Panama. All 7 people on board were killed. The cause of the crash remains disputed to this day. The documents related to the investigation went missing during the U.S. invasion of Panama and were never found. 3 months earlier, the president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, the other leader Perkins mentions, died in a remarkably similar plane crash. 2 leaders, both refused the system. Both died in plane crashes within months of each other. You connect the dots.
And Omar Torrijos was a magnificent man. He had his faults, like everybody. But he saw that clearly what I was going to do. He invited me to this little bungalow outside Panama City to have a private meeting with him. And he said, look, I know what you're doing. I know the game you guys are playing. And I know what you're going to do is inflate all these forecasts. And you're going to give me a system that I can use and a few of my wealthy friends. But my country's going to suffer. And your country's going to get rich. And you're going to have a hold on me. What you really want is my canal. So I'm not going to let this happen. He said, what I will do is if you will agree with me to come in here and do a study and, put together a plan that really helps my people, helps the poorest of the poor, then I'll see to it that you and your company get more and more projects. But you got to be honest. You got to do good work. So basically what he was telling me is don't be an economic hitman. Be what you, truly be what you say you are and do a good job at it. And I welcomed this, of course, and ultimately so did my company because it got business. But of course, what Omar Torrijos was doing in this process was defying the whole system, because the system is built on an assumption that the people at the top are all corruptible. And if you find someone at the top who isn't corruptible, then he can destroy the system, not only in that country, but in many other places. Because once someone starts to resist and someone starts to point out the truth behind the system and the fact that it can be opposed, then everybody in the system sees a threat and is in trouble. And so one day his Twin Otter plane, the presidential plane, blew up and he was killed. And I was waiting for it to happen. This is the way the Jackals do things. And there was a lot of evidence that a tape recorder that he'd been given before the plane took off was a bomb. There's no question in my mind, and there's no question in a lot of the minds of a lot of the investigators throughout South America. People knew that this was a CIA-orchestrated assassination. Of course, it hardly made our press.
The Jackals. That's what he calls them. When the economic hitmen fail, the Jackals come in. CIA-sanctioned operatives sent to foment coups, remove leaders from power, or assassinate them if nothing else works. And this wasn't just Panama and Ecuador. In Chile, a CIA-backed coup brought down a democratically elected president in 1973. In 1975, the CIA supported right-wing military dictatorships across 6 Latin American countries simultaneously through a coordinated operation. Researchers have identified at least 25 CIA-sponsored coups between 1963 and 1981 alone. And studies show that countries where this happened never quite recovered economically. Generations of people paid the price for a decision made in a boardroom thousands of miles away. This is the pattern. Economic hitmen first, Jackals second, military third. And it worked. Every single time. Until it didn't. But listen carefully to what comes next. He's going to mention a country that's been in the headlines a lot this year. Make of it what you will.
I did a lot of work in the next few years in Panama, and I also went back to Indonesia to do the same sort of thing we'd done in Java up on the island of Sulawesi, and Colombia, and Iran. So for 3 or 4 years, my time was very much split between those countries, and I would take other journeys into Egypt and Guatemala and many other places, and I began hiring. I mean, I became very popular within Charles T. Main because I was going along with the system, and the World Bank was loving what I was doing, and I just kept expanding my department. I became a partner. I was making a lot of money, and for the company as well as for myself. So it involved quite a few countries, but you know, the ones that had the greatest impression on me after Indonesia were Panama and Iran.
Panama, Indonesia, Colombia, Iran, Egypt, Guatemala. Not a vacation list, a work list. And the work was always the same. The more countries, the more money, the more promotions. The system rewards you for not asking questions. And the higher he climbed, the deeper in he got. But what he's about to explain next is something that happens every single day, in every country, completely out in the open, clean, legal, completely invisible. And nobody talks about it.
Our companies are prohibited by law from bribing people outright. I can't go in and say, I want to win this contract, Mike, so, you know, here's $400,000. Make sure I get the contract. That's very illegal, and it's almost never done by U.S. companies. It is done by companies from other countries where it's not illegal, or not as illegal. But our companies don't do that, and they pride themselves on their integrity for not doing that. Instead, what they do, if I want to bribe you, if you're president, I want to bribe you, I want to give you $400,000. I'll say, well, do you have a brother or a friend who owns the John Deere franchise in this country? And you say yes. And so I'll negotiate a deal with that person to rent his equipment. I'll rent $600,000 worth of his equipment, and I'll pay $1 million. And there's nothing illegal about that. I can always fall back and say, oh my God, I didn't know I could have got it for $600,000. I cut a bad deal. How stupid of me. But it's obvious then that the side agreement is that extra $400,000 will go to you, the president. This happens all the time. So much of this stuff that's done that is immoral. I think it's unethical. I think it really should be illegal. But the way it's done, it's legitimate because the laws are written to protect this system, to protect what I call the corporatocracy, the big business, big banks, and government people who are running this empire.
The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. And that's what makes it so effective. Think about it. When the people close to power know in advance that a currency is about to collapse or that oil prices are about to spike, that's not luck. That's the game. And the rest of us, the ones working, paying taxes, following the rules, we're just living in the aftermath of decisions we were never a part of. The world isn't fair. But the least we can do is understand it. Because you can't protect yourself from something you don't see. And you definitely can't trust the news alone to tell you what's really going on.
I was the only person on that 11-man team that knew the subtleties of what we're doing. I was the only economic hitman. I was the economist. I was the one who did all the forecasts. I was the one to arrange the loans. That all fell on me. The other men on that team were designing power plants, were designing the highways and ports to bring the fuels in to fuel the power plants, designing transmission lines, distribution systems, that sort of work. And throughout the industry, when I talk about these other companies, the Bechtels, the Halliburtons, the Stone & Websters, the Charles T. Mains, and the World Bank, I want to make it very clear that the majority of the people working for those organizations are not economic hitmen. They are technicians, they're engineers, they're doing what they believe is their job of designing systems. But there's always somebody at the top, there's always somebody in that organization that has a complete understanding of what's going on. It's very few people. Most of these people are in the dark about this, and they shouldn't be in the dark about it. I mean, it should be pretty obvious to them what they're doing, as it should be pretty obvious to all of us in this country where our tax money is going. It isn't that obvious. The system is an amazingly subtle and an incredibly effective system.
Most people in the system have no idea what the system is actually doing. The engineer designs the power plant, the economist builds the forecast, the banker approves the loan. Everyone does their job. Nobody asks the bigger question. That's how it works. You don't need everyone to be corrupt. You just need the right person at the top who knows exactly what's really going on. And below them, 1,000 good people doing their jobs, keeping the machine running without ever seeing the full picture. But here's what should really keep you up at night. It's not just happening out there in some distant country. The numbers are closer to home than most people want to admit.
We have a statistic that we throw around in this country a lot, that 5% of the world's population, us, the American population, consumes 25% of the world's resources. Now that really bothers most of the rest of the world, that we're like this great octopus that reaches out with its tentacles and brings all the resources into us, and look at the lives we lead, while 3/4 of the world lives in destitution. Every day, 24,000 people die of starvation. And 30,000 children die of curable diseases every single day. And the people who live in the places where that's happening are angry, and they see us 5% of the world's population bringing in 25% of its resources, while so many of them live tragic, destitute, miserable, suffering lives, needlessly suffering. It doesn't have to happen. But an even more important statistic, I believe, is that of that 5% of the world's population, only less than 1% controls more of America's resources than the 90% at the bottom. So in fact, 25% of the world's resources are being funneled into this country essentially to serve 1% of 5% of the world's population. Terribly small. It's not even a pyramid. It's like a needle going up with a few very wealthy, very powerful people sitting on the top.
24,000 people die of starvation every day. 30,000 children die of curable diseases every single day. Not because we don't have the resources. We do. More than enough. But because of where those resources end up and who controls them. This is the world the system built. And it's not a government doing this. It's not even a country. It's just a handful of people sitting on top of a needle, pulling the strings. Lobbyists, CIA officials, congressmen, billions of dollars changing hands. All of it out in the open if you know where to look. And still, most people have never heard of any of this. That's not an accident. The most powerful force in this system isn't money. It's silence. So the only thing left to ask yourself is, now that you know, what are you going to do with it?
All of these companies have lobbyists in one form or another that are deeply involved in this. Some of the information that's come out at Vanity Fair and a number of other magazines, and U.S. News and World Report did a very deep investigation of the Saudi relationship with our government back about a year ago. And one of the things they found was that billions of dollars had come from Saudi Arabia to pay for lobbyists and to pay off former CIA employees, government officials, congressmen, Pentagon officials. This was all documented in those magazines, and it's footnoted in my book. I mean, if someone's looking for a reference, they can go directly to those magazines. Of course, it doesn't surprise me in the least bit, but it's a very, very corrupt system, and corruption can be done in extremely subtle ways.
Let's take a moment to recognize our channel sponsor, which is Decent Wallet. Right here, a brand new promotion. It's a really nice one. XRP Alliance, where you can wake up your idle XRP with flair, right? A lot of times you guys point out, Max, I want to put my XRP and some of my other crypto to work. Well, here's one way you can do it. And as it points out, wake up your idle XRP, of course, with flair by getting a Decent Wallet to get $50 in XRP cash back. So take you over to the actual landing page. If you were to click on my link in the description, it will take you over to here where you can make your XRP work. This is for a limited time. The event ends on June 8th. But as you see here, right down here, $50 XRP reward for one biometric Decent Wallet. But your biggest bang for the buck is if you get two of them, you get 100 XRP reward. And in fact, for a limited time, you save about 25%, as you see right here. Brings the price down from $318 to $239, which brings the price down to $119.50 each. So if this is something that interests you, check it out. Links are in the description. Let's get back to the video. Let's take it a little bit more further. Number one, in simple, everyday words, no fancy talk. The video is definitely John Perkins. And he did explain a secret club, did he not? That basically runs the world economy. Big banks, companies, and governments trick poor countries into taking giant loans for big projects like highways or power plants. Most of the loan money actually flows right back into rich United States companies like Halliburton or Bechtel that build the stuff. The poor country ends up drowning in debt it can never repay, so it stays poor and under control. Only the top 1% basically win. On top of that, it's all done legally. Yes, legally. Through middlemen, so no one gets in trouble. Now, the blockchains, the DLTs that we talk a lot about, your XRPs, your XLMs, your XDCs, your Hedera HBARs, your Quant networks, QNT, and similar ones. These are like the new digital shortcuts for moving money and, of course, doing business. They cut off, or I should say cut out, most of the expensive middlemen, make transfers lightning fast and cheap, and more importantly, they put everything on a public shared record book that anyone can check. There's no more hidden tricks or endless debt traps for countries. Instead of borrowing billions from the old club and getting stuck, a country or small business could raise money directly, send payments instantly across borders, or turn real things, for example, like trade deals or property, into digital tokens that trade fairly. That's why I included things like Zenfin's XDC. Now keep in mind, it's not magic that destroys the old system overnight, such as your banks and governments, but those ones are already testing these tools. Better believe that when it comes to the bottom line, this gives regular people in smaller countries a fair way to play the money game without getting trapped. Think of it as building open highways instead of toll roads controlled by a few gatekeepers. I'm going to provide you the actual official documents straight from each project's main website as of June 2026. I pulled the key mission statements and descriptions exactly as they appear on their public pages. No spin, no summaries. So for one, let's start off with this and then we'll show you the document. It's basically Ripple. Yes, with the XRP ledger. There's a simple crossover here, ladies and gentlemen, because we know XRP lets banks and businesses send money across countries in seconds for pennies, skipping the slow, expensive old banking web that creates debt loops. Countries don't need giant loans just to move cash around. What about the actual document that I found? Well, it's from the official Ripple payments page. And I'm going to read this quote with you as I pull this up. So let's just do that. If you were to go over to this site yourself, you would see a few key things. And basically, it gets right to the point. And the point is that you're going to see this quote, and it's very, very eye-opening to say the least. So pull this up. I want you guys to see firsthand some of the things that are mentioned here. By partnering closely with Ripple and introducing Ripple payments to new markets, we aim to further Tranglo's ambition to provide accessible and equitable financial services to the masses. Together, we've eliminated pre-funding requirements for partners in more than 20 countries. That right there is a very, very powerful statement. It basically tells you that Ripple Payments is in fact a Ripple cross-border payment solution that allows businesses, banks, and fintechs to move money globally in seconds. And when you wrap your mind around that, it dramatically reduces the delays, the high cost, and lack of transparency associated with traditional correspondent banking by using blockchain technology to secure and settle transactions instantly and securely. At the end of the day, think about it. You have things like Ripple Payments, which, as we know, uses the XRP ledger and digital assets to streamline the payment process. And more importantly, in 3 to 5 seconds with full transparency. Let's bring you into the next part, and that is XLM with Stellar. There's a simple crossover here as well, and that basically is Stellar is built to help everyday people, especially those in poor countries, as highlighted in the introduction to this video. You're going to get cheap access to money services, remittances, and global finance. Those are exactly the groups the old debt system, of course, leaves behind. What about the actual documents? Yeah, straight from the official Stellar.org and Stellar Development Foundation pages. Well, we're going to pull that up as well, because in the process of doing so, you're going to see a firsthand account of why I do these deep dives with you. Number one, you're going to see some things in regard to Stellar and how they unite a global community. So for one, as we pull this up, I want you guys to see it firsthand. When we talk about borderless payments and some of these other things, keep in mind that Stellar powers borderless payments, asset tokenization, and DeFi solutions for builders, institutions, and innovators worldwide. More importantly, you see some of the familiar players: UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, Wisdom Tree, PayPal, Bridge, which is a Stripe company, of course DTCC, and even MoneyGram. I'll give you guys a deep dive here soon in regard to some key things that happened recently with Stellar and MoneyGram. More importantly, as you see here, for financial institutions, showing leading institutions building the future of finance on Stellar, launch payment investment solutions that scale globally. People don't realize how big that really is. You have to be able to scale. If you don't scale, you have some serious problems. If anything, I have to have the same user experience as you or anyone else in this world when it comes to these financial products and services. And like it says, enterprise-grade security and compliance tools. When you really jump into it, in a nutshell, Stellar unites a global community, and they create an open network and transform the global financial system. But SDF, which is Stellar Development Foundation for short, well, they are a nonprofit organization that created and did this whole structure to achieve a mission. And what is that mission? Creating equitable access to the global financial system, of course, through blockchain technology. Which leads us to our next particular topic. And that, of course, is XinFin's XDC. Yeah, XDC. So for one, there is a simple crossover even with this. For one, XDC turns real-world trade and business deals into digital tokens so small companies and countries can finance projects directly, cheaply, and transparently. Basically, again, without the old loan traps that only help the rich. What about the actual documents? Well, I have one that's straight from the xdc.org homepage. And if anything, we're going to pull that up. As we do that, basically, you're going to see some things. And to me, sometimes it's nice to nerd it out. We see here from XDC, the success depends on your network. Well, of course, I shared this visual a few years back. It's very, very familiar. But nonetheless, when you get into this whole thing in itself, keep in mind, XDC Network is an enterprise-grade open-source blockchain protocol, an EVM-compatible chain with smart contract capabilities. If you're new to the terminology, EVM means Ethereum Virtual Machine. It is uniquely suited to revolutionize, decentralize, and liquefy trade finance industry through the tokenization of real-world assets and financial instruments. Why does that matter to you? Well, I think it's literally this simple. If you look more into XDC, well, they themselves do seem as though that they are the fast, secure blockchain that supports trade finance. RWA, again, if you're new to it all, real world asset tokenization, and even enterprise applications, because XDC Network sets the benchmark for digitizing trade finance by enabling the tokenization of diverse trade finance instruments. And that itself means reducing costs and connecting institutions as well as SMEs. And again, if you're new to that terminology, which is small, medium enterprises, for a faster, more inclusive digital economy. Which brings me to our next part of the outline, and that is Hedera with HBAR. There's, of course, a simple crossover from what you saw in the intro video, even with them. And let's jump into that. So with HBAR, they have a super secure rule-following network. Yes, rule-following. Here at Maximus Crypto, I've put a lot of emphasis over the many years of covering blockchain DLT that you have to have standards, which leads, of course, to rules. And those rules do matter, especially when it comes to international finance. Nonetheless, Hedera definitely has that rule book. More importantly, it's rule-following network run by big trusted companies, not your autonomous users. It makes big money stuff like tokenized assets and payments work cleanly for real businesses, reducing the sneaky, unaccountable deals Perkins described. Shout out to Jesse of Apex Crypto Insights. How many videos did we do together where he cited basically the one and only John Perkins and his books, or I should say his book, that is called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He's encouraged all of us to look more into it. So if anything, hopefully you're enjoying the coverage that I'm providing you today. Decide to get real deep into this. What about the actual documents? Well, this is officially from Hedera.com, and nonetheless, let's pull this up as well. As we do, I want you guys to see a few things. Number one is this right here, and while it's a cool looking effect, it's the visuals, right? Sometimes people don't understand why such companies have these particular logos. I've used this expression not that long ago, and that is full stack, things with multiple layers. And as you see that, literally, it's the HBAR logo, but breaking it down for you to visualize it a lot more. Again, a future built on trust. As the world's only public network governed by known institutions, look at that, Hedera is the trusted platform for building fast, secure, and compliant decentralized applications. Now, again, we talk about Quant Network a lot when it comes to the Internet of Trust, and we talk about, obviously, Hedera. Again, keep in mind the crossover between the two. Co-founder of Quant Network is Paulo Tasca, and he's had, of course, collaboration with both Hedera and even Quant Network. So jump back to this. I want you guys to see some more things, and that is this. When we talk about Hedera, please keep in mind, as the world's only public network governed by known institutions, Hedera is in fact a trusted platform for building fast, secure, and compliant decentralized applications. We did mention another Internet of Trust player, that is Quant Network, with the Overledger, with things like their native token, QNT. What's the simple crossover here? Well, it's this. QNT acts like a universal translator that lets old banking systems talk to new blockchain ones. It connects everything without forcing everyone to switch overnight, and that means lowering the cost and risk so the old monopoly on money slowly loosens. But in reality, when you think about Quant Network, they themselves have products and services that are basically a monopoly. How so? Well, things like basically Quant's Overledger Fusion Layer 2.5. There'll be a lot of people in this space that will FUD Quant Network and say that they have actual competition, but in reality, nobody has a Layer 2.5. That's plug and play, it's game changer, and I won't shut up about it. But nonetheless, I want you guys to keep in mind that when we get more into Quant, well, again, keep in mind there's actual documents from the Quant Network Overledger page that mention a few specific things. And more importantly, let's just take you to there. The whole ability to build, deploy, and manage multi-chain applications with ease, well, at the end of the day, you're leveraging decentralized apps with a thing called MDApps built into the Overledger, legacy systems, new systems, all with the whole idea of Overledger, which is the world's first API blockchain gateway. And seamless orchestration? Yes, seamless orchestration between multiple blockchains. More importantly, while there's a lot of things here, I love these two ones I'm going to highlight. Number one is the whole idea that you're going to have cross-chain transactions, enable asset transfers between blockchains, supporting use cases such as atomic swaps, asset tokenization, and cross-border payments. QNT in itself won't be doing the real-time gross settlements, but nonetheless, they are the most supreme interoperability layer. We share demos where you connect to things like the XRP ledger and you settle in XRP. And again, if you haven't seen those videos, go to my video section. I have at least 2 or 3 of those that specifically highlight that. And you're more than welcome to even do a simple Google search to find the Quant Overledger demo. I believe it's Overledger 2.0. And their first choice was to settle in XRP. The other area I want to highlight is scalability and performance. Remember how I talked about that earlier? Well, you're going to be able to scale and leverage the strengths of each blockchain network. That's the power of Quant. Again, it's an operating system that's going to pick whatever is needed for the current instance or the current operation that's in front of you. It's not picking anything and everything randomly. Again, that's crucial moving forward into Web3 and, of course, into the fourth industrial revolution. Jumping back, I want to point out some other key things, and that is when we think about Quant Network, well, again, they are the universal API connector, and that ensures secure interoperability, of course, between traditional finance systems and blockchain networks. Again, it connects digital money, those assets, and existing payment rails, such as your banking infrastructures, financial applications, but more importantly, the whole entire blockchain ecosystem. So what I'm sharing with you guys here are real public statements straight from the organizations running each project. That's crucial. And of course, you're welcome to visit any of those links I shared on the screen to verify the sources and see it for yourself. But from what I gathered, they haven't changed their core purpose because the technology is still growing and getting tested by banks, governments, et cetera, et cetera. But for me and you, the goal is clear: faster, cheaper, more open money movement that doesn't rely on the old debt and control playbook, as pointed out by John Perkins. One last thing I want to leave you guys with, which is this brand new update. Shout out to this guy. His name is Ledger Man. He'll be followed over at StriveX_. I'm going to go ahead and reshare this. Hardly anybody share this, okay? So for one, he points out the president of the European Central Bank praised Ripple. Yes, of course. It says the conversation around XRP and real world finance keeps getting bigger. At the same time, banks with an X networks XRPL powered media ecosystem keeps expanding with 500 plus journalists, 55,000 plus publications, and a possible uphold listing within 30 days. And of course, he has these links. It says the XRPL ecosystem is rapidly growing beyond payments and into real world digital infrastructure. I put a lot of emphasis the last few years when it comes to Ripple, Hedera, and Quant network, and even lately when it comes to Stellar in regard to things like the digital euro. Now, we know that Stellar isn't doing the digital euro, but they're doing the digital euro stablecoin, and that's important to highlight. But nonetheless, think about this. This is literally the head of the ECB. This is Christine Lagarde. Listen to what she mentioned a while back. Put a lot of emphasis on the very end part of what she mentions. Here we go.
Into new technologies that will actually change the way in which intermediation is conducted, eliminate some of the barriers, including the unconscious biases that exist out there. And I think in the banking system at large, in many countries, the difference will not be between those who are disrupted and those who survive, but it will be between those who are cannibalized because they're not seeing it coming and they're not embracing it, and those who self-induce that cannibalization. And I'm using cannibalization on purpose because it's a bit of a striking, horrible word. But it's really what it means. It's you're going to disrupt your business model, you're going to change it, you're going to reduce your cost, you're going to expedite your transactions, and you're going to continue to inspire confidence because you will build that on the basis of an existing backbone, which is your bank and the confidence relationship that you've established with your customers. So that's where I see changes happening now. If you think of Circle and Ripples and all those, that's where they are active and helpful. Into new tech.
A lot of the OGs have seen this video, but nonetheless, there's a lot of people who haven't. Okay, so let's jump back to a little bit more about this. So for one, on May 30th, just in case you weren't aware of it, Banks Exchange says, we are excited to announce that we have been in contact with Uphold, leader in supporting and expanding XRP ledger infrastructure and adoption. We anticipate receiving confirmation regarding the initial review process within the next 30 days. Banks Network is proud to be building one of the largest decentralized media ecosystems powered by BXE payments on the XRP ledger. At that time, it says their network includes more than 502 journalists and over 55,000 publications, while our iOS application has surpassed 1,000 downloads and continues to grow rapidly. We look forward to sharing additional updates as we continue expanding decentralized media powered by the XRP ledger. And of course, you see the submission of listing application for BXE on Uphold. And again, as you see here, the media platform, the XRP ledger, and of course, Uphold. Now, before we wrap it up completely, I basically want to do this once again to break it down into layman's terms. Okay, so for one, while it seems like it's a little bit of hype, I want to point out at least two things at once to paint a broader perspective of, yeah, this is bullish for XRP and its ecosystem, but again, kind of explain it in a way that you can quickly understand. So number one, we saw that video clip. We saw Christine Lagarde, who, as we know, is the president of the European Central Bank, but of course, years ago, she was the head of the IMF at the time. She did speak at the Paris FinTech Forum back in 2019. That's a clip from that time. I want to be transparent with you guys. But in the panel discussions, she's talking about how the new financial technologies can break down barriers to traditional banking and urging banks to embrace innovation instead of resisting it. Again, the overlap to even things like I shared with basically the one and only John Perkins, right? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. All these things are worth pointing out. It adds up, at least to me. So again, think about this, breaking down the barriers in traditional banking, urging banks to embrace innovation instead of resisting it. So again, even though you saw that person who posted this and was framing in a way in which basically the ECB president praised Ripple, as in Christine Lagarde, well, it's not like a brand new statement where she name drops Ripple explicitly in this exact clip, but nonetheless, you have to keep in mind people in crypto communities are going to resurface it, whether it's me and others, because it in fact shows how Lagarde has referenced Ripple positively in the past as part of a helpful part of like fintech's innovations, and that's worth basically sharing. Now, what about Banks Network? Well, you have to keep in mind this update. This is quoting a recent announcement, of course, from a project built on the XRP ledger, and Banks Network is creating a decentralized media platform, whether you realize it or not. So keep in mind that this platform is with hundreds of journalists already involved, but they're in talks with Uphold, as you guys saw in that little document. And as we know, Uphold has already supported XRP for many, many years, while others like Coinbase didn't. And that's what separates itself. And of course, this is to expand XRPL infrastructure and possibly get better integration or listings. They expect an update, of course, in the next 30 days. So why is this significant? Well, it basically means that you have high-level institutional vibes here. Like central bankers like Lagarde run the world's money systems and set the tone basically for regulations, whether you like Lagarde or some of these other central bankers or not. You have to keep in mind that even an old positive nod from somebody like Christine Lagarde, well, while that may get recycled in crypto circles, no pun intended, because it signals that big finance players see real value in Ripple's tech, I mean, come on. Of course they would, right? You got fast, cheap cross-border payments and the XRPL blockchain. In a world where regulators have sometimes been tough on crypto, like the old US and SEC case against Ripple and many other instances, any thumbs up from Europe feels like validation, at least in my eyes, and could make banks and companies more comfortable, of course, using the XRPL, which leads us obviously to things like Clarity. People skip on the whole idea of Clarity. They dismiss it, but Clarity is going to greenlight, again, the adoption that we need. I shared this earlier the other day, I believe yesterday, on the live show with myself, Rob Rue, and of course, Longview Compute, Scott. And that is, again, something like the Central Bank of Indonesia. You had Sagar Sabahai, who at the time was part of Ripple. He went on, of course, to join Fireblocks later on, but nonetheless, he was pitching to at least that central bank, and they were very impressed with Ripple, with on-demand liquidity and the XRP use case, and were blown away with it. But again, they point out we cannot hold this on our balance sheets because, again, we are without the lack of clarity. Again, I understand a lot of people are giving you guys some news and they're cherry picking some things about stating that there's no way that we can get to a $10 XRP price target and the tokenomics don't match up and so on. For me personally, I go to the documents and I realize that guess what? There's something to be said about a central bank, whether you like them or not, being able to transact more in one day than Bitcoin can do in a whole year. And again, that's where, in my opinion, the flip of the switch really is going to happen. I'd rather be prepared than not be prepared. To me, that's what really, really matters. And at the end of the day, please keep in mind that when you look into things even like Uphold, well, this means easier access, more users, more activity, of course, on the network. The XRP isn't just Ripple's old payment tool anymore, everybody. It's branching into decentralized apps, tokenized assets, and real-world stuff. So what does it mean for you who hold XRP? Well, I'll give you at least 3 examples real quick before we wrap up this video. For short term, these kinds of posts often spark excitement, of course, in the XRP community. I mean, no kidding. And it leads to price bounces or increased trading volumes where sentiment turns positive. News like this keeps XRP, of course, in the conversation and, of course, can attract new buyers. Some people are going to point out, no, it's down. That's an invalid statement. But nonetheless, it's worth sharing. Number 2, what about long-term? I'm into XRP long-term, but I also have a separate portfolio for things like BTCC. I could use some of that to basically acquire more assets when, let's face it, there's like a dumpster fire, right? As the saying goes, you buy the fear. At least that's what I'm doing, not financial advice, but the long-term vision means more adoption, of course, of the XRPL. I mean, again, everybody, don't overshadow this. Don't overlook it. Like banks, as in BANX, okay, that's the way to spell it, growing or banks using it, this increases real demand for XRP. Yes, XRP, because XRP isn't just a speculative coin, as people pointed out. It's used to pay tiny fees on the ledger and acts as a bridge for fast transfers. Now, I know, currently speaking, people are going to say, that seems kind of speculative. But again, with clarity, things will change. The more projects and institutions that build on it, the more XRP gets used and the stronger its utility becomes. People aren't telling you this. They are basically cherry picking key things, and that's no knock on the person that I'm clearly referencing, right? Because the way I look at it is Europe is pushing digital finance. You have the digital euro, blockchain settlements, and it could open doors, of course, for the XRPL partnerships. All right, so what would be like the caveat here? Well, basically, we know that crypto is still volatile. I mean, my goodness, look at what's going on in the market, right? But basically, this isn't guaranteed moonshot news. It's community-driven hype mixing old clips with fresh project updates. And I get that. But it does fit the bigger trend of XRPL quietly adding real-world use cases beyond just payments. And don't we want that? I think we do. In closing, basically, was that last post that you saw with Christine Lagarde and the banks highlight, I want to leave you with this. Big money people have liked Ripple's ideas for years, clearly. And the ecosystem is still expanding today. For us who are holders of XRP or some of these other assets, it's a reminder that the story is about utility and adoption, not just price charts. And moments like this can help build that momentum. So that's what I have for you today. Let me know what you thought. Drop into the comments if you have, of course, read this book, obviously, by John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, in your basic thoughts. Also, do me a solid if you happen to listen to the entire outline and simply type in his name, and that is John Perkins. It lets me know who's paying attention and who really isn't, and of course, if you watch to the end. That's what I have. As the saying goes, know what you have, know why you hold it. The research trumps FUD 110%. May the Lord Jesus bless you all. I truly mean that. We'll see you guys in the next video. Over and out. Bye-bye.